In today's video, I'm going to show you how I built my own one stick. Alright guys, before we get started, I want to go ahead and say that this is not a how-to video. Do not attempt anything you see in this video at home. If you do, you're doing so at your own risk. Okay, so to start off, I'm using a piece of 1¼ inch by 1/4 inch thick flat steel. And then I'm just cutting it down to size. I cut 2 9-inch pieces and 4 4-inch pieces. And as you can see, when I stack them on top of each other, that gives me a 1-inch gap in the center for the square tubing. All the bolts that I'm using in this are grade 8. Now I'm just tacking the steps together. So that I can run a bead all the way around the entire thing. Once I have the steps fully welded up, I use an angle grinder to cut notches in the top for traction. This is what the finished product looks like. I put this little notch in the top of it for the rope to lay in. Now I'm working on the standoffs, and I cut it out of the same 1/4 inch flat steel. I cut 2 pieces that were 4 inches and 1 piece that's 1 inch. Now I am just welding them together. At this point, I fill up a container with water, and then I start adding spray paint to it. This is what's going to give me my camouflage pattern. And then I dip each piece individually. Spraying more paint so that I can dip the steps. Once I have all the pieces hydro dipped, I use a piece of 3/4 inch tubular webbing, climbing rated. And here I'm taking steel cable with a rubber coating, and then I'm just adding heat shrink tubing to the end. That way there's no sharp ends. Once I heat shrink all the steel cable ends, I take 2 and I put it in a piece of 1 foot tubular webbing. Then I take the other 2 pieces and I feed it all the way through the long piece of tubular webbing until it reaches the center. What this does is it holds the aider out and open so that it doesn't collapse on itself, and it makes it easier for me to get my foot in and out. Now I am measuring where I'm going to put my second step. I then sew the small strip to the full length. At this point, I'm taking a piece of Amsteel and I'm just creating a continuous loop. By cutting half of the frayed ends off, it allows me to taper it. Once I have my taper, I run this piece of wire through the center of the Amsteel so that I can pull that piece back through. I then milk it so that the whole piece is inside of the piece of Amsteel. And then I repeat on the other side. I pull it all the way through so that it's completely buried in the center. Once I have my loops, I then sew them to the end of my aider. On all of these connections, I'm using a box stitch with the X in the center. Now I'm putting a loop in a piece of Amsteel so that I can connect the bungee with the ball on the end of it to the Amsteel. So at this point I start to reassemble, and I start off first with my steps and my standoffs. I have this continuous loop of Amsteel that I slide down in between the bolt, and that gives me a handle to pull up on when I'm using it. I'm using lock nuts on all the bolts. Now I'm getting ready to assemble the cam cleat. I start off by placing the cam cleat on the center of the pipe and marking it. Here I'm just drilling out the holes for the bolts to go through. I test the first one to make sure that it's center, and then I mark my second one. Once I have everything set where it needs to be, I mark so that I can drill a hole for the piece of Amsteel. I put it through the center of the cleat in the middle of the pipe. I ream out the hole so that there's no sharp edges. I then feed the Amsteel through the hole, and then I connect it with a Brahma lock. I tighten it down so that I can feed the other piece back through the small piece. And that locks it onto the tube. Now all I have to do is bury the tail. And I just put a bigger taper on this. Because of how long the tail is, I have to do this in 2 shots. Now the Amsteel is connected to the tube. I put my lock nut on the back of the cleat and I snug it down, making sure that it's not too tight. Otherwise, it'll keep the cleat open and the cleat won't work properly. Now I'm getting ready to try it out, and the first thing I do is hook up my rope. Now I make my move, I slide over, and everything worked good. The only changes I would make to this one stick is the standoffs. I made them at about 3-4 inches to give me more space to step on the top. However, they push it too far out, so I'm not able to pinch it with my rope. So I am going to shorten the standoffs a little bit, but other than that, it worked beautifully. Now I'm just hooking up my pull down rope and rappelling down. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.